Most people would really actually agree on very similar things. Safety, everybody wants a safe community, opportunity to be able to earn a living wage, to have decency in our work, and to have meaning in our lives, as well as a safe future for our children filled with opportunities. No one disagrees with any of this. So, why does it feel like we're living in two very separate realities? I'm going to introduce the idea that we're living in the illusion of two worlds. And again, illusion is deliberate. Many people believe the country is very divided because we've become very extreme. But yet, the research suggests something different, that we actually do agree on quite a bit. Most Americans, while they still hold a mixture of views, many still do support some of the basic ideas that I just mentioned. Even though some may have slightly more conservative or progressive ideas, we all still agree on the decency of having a safe life where we can work and make a decent living and have our children go to school and be free of violence. So, I want to introduce into the conversation the idea of political tribalism. Again, going back to that us and them mentality. I think it's important to say that disagreement is normal. Disagreement is part of our natural human tendencies, and disagreement is healthy. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned in my first episode, I've worked in education and in leadership. There's a lot of research that shows that corporations that have a diverse view, diversity of people actually creates more sustainable work cultures, and actually productivity is enhanced and innovation goes up. Disagreement is not bad. Disagreement simply means that we might have different ideas. And democracy requires disagreement. The problem begins when disagreement transforms into tribalism. So, what is political tribalism? Human beings evolved in tribes. Let's go back to the beginning. And for the most of human history, belonging to a group increased survival because the tribe or your group protected you, they fed you, defended you. Being rejected by your group could mean a certain death. So the human brain still carries traces of those ancient instincts, the need for us to live in a group. And that's why we live in societies, in groups, in cities. But today, political parties begin to function like tribes. And people don't just support the policy of the party, they have now adopted it as their own personal identity. And once identity forms, the brain starts protecting it. Let's go into an example. Imagine two people reading the exact same news story. One identifies strongly to the left and the other to the right. The facts are still identical in the story they're reading, but the interpretation likely will be very different. Each person unconsciously searches for evidence supporting their tribe and dismisses the evidence threatening it. Let's take a different example, a sports analogy. Think about sports. When your team wins, you celebrate. When your team loses, we usually like to blame the referee and how they were unfair. So we're able to forgive the mistakes of our side and magnify the mistakes of the other side. And this is how political tribalism works. So the moment that politics begin to shape our identity, a policy disagreement then becomes a very personal attack. And the opposing viewpoint becomes a threat. And at that point, our curiosity disappears, and so does our ability to be able to listen and have a conversation. Now, when we throw algorithms and social media into it, it makes things much more complex. Let's circle back and think about what an algorithm is. To put it simply, it's a computer program, as we would say back in my day. It's a system that's designated to predict what will keep your attention. It's the first AI. So every major platform uses an algorithm. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X. They're not asking if things are true or if it's healthy. or does it create a better understanding of things? They simply are asking one question: does it keep you engaged? So, social media has actually become an attention economy. And it's now become one of the most valuable resources because now attention has become monetized. In other words, corporations are making money off of our attention. The more attention means more advertising revenue, and more engagement means more profits. Imagine two social media posts. The first post is a meaningful, thoughtful discussion of economic policy. A lot of people would say boring. I'm kind of a data nerd, so I would probably dive into it. But the other post is headlined How the Other Side is Destroying Our Country. The one that's going to generate the stronger emotional reaction is probably going to be post B, and it's probably going to get more comments and more shares and likely more outrage. And so that becomes the problem. Algorithms learn from our behavior, and if outrage captures our attention, then the system learns and it will serve us more outrage. Not because someone necessarily thinks that this is good, but because outrage performs better and creates profits. And now we're in a feedback loop. And the results continue on. People engage with more outrage, algorithms deliver more outrage, and people become more emotional, and the algorithm continues to amplify it further. Eventually, people begin to believe that the outrage has become reality. I will say that I have been part of that culture, and it's taken me a while through many conversations with my son, millennial, to start to disengage from from not just social media. I never really did a lot of social media, but from the mainstream media silo, and start to question. And I've gone as far as to actually listen to some opinions on the other side, not the extreme ones, but I started to, and I have come to realize that there are certain things that we agree on, and that maybe they're not exactly the boogeyman that I thought that they were. So that is another reason for this podcast, to start to have this conversation and to invite you into your own examination of the same. Let's look into one of the more controversial topics, at least of the last couple of elections: identity politics. Identity politics occurs when political issues become organized around a group identity. That group identity could be race, it could be gender, it could be religion, sexual orientation, it could be nationality or class. It's important to consider that identity itself is not the problem. Humans naturally belong to groups. The problem is that there have been many historical injustices that affect certain groups differently, and that reality does matter. So the challenge emerges when identity becomes the primary lens through which we see every issue and interpret every issue. When that happens, individuals then become representative of the category instead of just being people. Imagine meeting someone and immediately placing them into a category or political box: Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive. The label begins speaking before the person has even said two words. I will admit, I've been guilty of that in the past. Now, imagine a working class factory worker and a billionaire. And let's say that they share the same political party. So their daily realities are vastly different, yet their political identity is what obscures those differences. I bring up the issue of the factory worker and the billionaire because I think it's really important to illustrate that party affiliation should not be more important than our ability to look at inequalities. Inequalities in income, inequalities in access to education or to healthcare. When we become so focused that party is the most important thing, that we are willing to unlook at what is happening to our neighbor, then yes, we have a very serious problem and we need to take a step back. Because I believe that in part, one of the reasons why we see the tech billionaires right now very involved in politics is so that they can affiliate with the ruling party, so to speak, and to be able to distract us from the vast inequalities that are greatly shaping this country. Working people are becoming poorer and poorer. It's becoming harder to earn a living wage. We all know that healthcare is extremely expensive if you don't have it sponsored by your employer. And even in those cases when your employer is sponsoring it, you still have to pay quite a bit. And that can hurt, especially if you're a single parent. So I just looked up some numbers, and roughly 50% of the voters that voted for Donald Trump make less than $50,000 a year. And the other half make less than $100,000 a year. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the richest of this country and of the world, the mega elite billionaires, have suddenly affiliated themselves with the working poor. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time, they're infiltrating social media with outrage, keeping us distracted from the reality of the lack of equity and the lack of access to things that every American should have. Every American should have access to health care. Everyone should have a good education. Everyone should have the opportunity to have a job that pays a living wage. These are not coincidental, these are done deliberately. It's the architecture of division and inequality. Imagine a working class factory worker, let's say in Pennsylvania, and a billionaire executive, let's say from California in the tech world. Let's say that they share the same political party, but their daily lives are vastly and radically different. I'm sure we would all agree. Yet their political identity is what obscures those differences when we are engaged in political tribalism. What happens when identity then becomes more important than the truth? So, what I'm getting at is that the individuals are able to look past their daily differences and perhaps the economic disparities simply because they belong to the same political party. What happens then when belonging becomes more important than equity or understanding? Those are the questions that are worth thinking about, and those are the questions that sit with me. Perhaps the greatest casualty of division is actually that we have stopped listening. Many people no longer want to listen. They wait. They wait for their turn to respond. I agree. I've been guilty of that. They wait for the flaw and they wait for their opening attack instead of defensive thinking. When identity feels threatened, the brain enters defensive mode. And defensive mode prioritizes protection, not exploration. Ask yourself this: when was the last time that you changed your mind about a major issue? Not because someone humiliated you, or because they shouted louder, or because someone listened first. Most people want to be understood, but few people spend actual time and energy in trying to understand and in asking questions. And so the cost is when listening disappears, relationships weaken, communities fragment, institutional trust is lost, and division becomes self sustaining. So, in closing, political tribalism is real. I want you to think about that. The amplification that algorithms in our social media are contributing to that is also very real. Identity based conflict is real and it's profitable. Think about that. People, billionaires, are profiting over our conflict. But because, so in closing, I'm going to leave you with this: political tribalism is real, and algorithms are amplifying conflict. Identity based conflict is real. But perhaps the most important realization is this: the division itself can become a construct because it's a self reinforcing system. which means as well that we can break it apart or deconstruct it. A structure that survives because everyone participates in it is no reason for it to survive. That doesn't mean that our differences are not real, because they are. But it also doesn't mean that every viewpoint is equally valid, because it is not. But it does mean that we should ask a question. Who is benefiting when citizens fear each other? Who benefits when outrage replaces dialogue? Who benefits when neighbors become enemies? Because awareness begins when we stop assuming division is inevitable and we start asking whether some of it is being engineered, amplified, rewarded, or simply accepted. The goal of this podcast isn't to tell you what you think, it's to encourage you to think more deeply, to question and examine, to remain curious, because awareness begins with questions. And sometimes the most important construct to examine is the one separating us from each other. Consider this. From the year 2015 to 2025, a 10-year period, Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, generated over $1 trillion in revenue, roughly 358 billion in profit. Now, that's not evidence of wrongdoing, but it is evidence that human attention has become one of the most valuable commodities in history. The problem is that if a company's business model depends on maximizing outrage, because outrage is what's profitable, then now we have a system that is artificially creating or constructing conflict. Think about that. I also want to take you into an experiment that took place in the 1950s by a well-known psychologist, Solomon Asch. And in his experiment, he had a group of participants and a group of actors. And everyone was asked to identify, of two lines, which one was longer. It was very obvious. But when the actors in the room intentionally started to give the wrong answer, many of the other participants in the group then followed along, even though they knew they were clearly wrong. So think about that. When people are willing to deny that what they actually see with their own eyes just to avoid social conflict, what does that mean then for our society? Imagine what that means to politics or religion or ideology or culture. What happens when our own political leaders are willing to deny what we see with our own eyes? What if the greatest threat to our society is not then disagreement? What if the greatest threat is our inability to disagree? What if it's just going along with the herd, even if we know it's wrong? What if democracy actually depends on something greater than elections, the inability or ability to listen? What if we need to have a greater ability to tolerate uncertainty or to admit when we are wrong? Because once certainty becomes absolute, I alone can fix it, I alone know, then the conversation ends, curiosity ends, listening ends, and perhaps that is the final construct worth examining, the illusion that our side has all the answers and all the wisdom, and that the other side has none. History suggests that whenever human beings have been completely certain about anything, problems always follow. Remember, awareness begins with questions, and one of the hardest questions to ask is, where might I be wrong?
Politics, media, culture, identity in a frame. You grow up calling it normal till you hear it has a name. What if the wall is invisible? What if the room is small? What if the truth was never missing? It was hiding in plain talk. Pull at the thread and watch it move. One small doubt can split the proof. If you felt there's more beneath your knowledge, inside the construct. Step inside the construct.